Look, I thought we might start a little bit more personally on this. There's a lot of big questions to ask on the role of AI for good. I thought I'd bring it down to start with on LinkedIn, right? We have this massive job transition that's about to happen. We know an enormous amount of workers, especially informal, they need their skills recognized. There's a big conversation about how much does this need to be about universities versus micro skills, credentialing. What do you see as some of these new exciting AI technologies that allow you to extend the impact of LinkedIn, a professional network, to many of the folks that perhaps are not being reached today?
Well, one of the things, my last book was Super Agency. The book before that was Impromptu. I described AI as amplification intelligence. So it's how do we do human amplification? And obviously the super agency is human agency increase. And I think that part of the thing that we most need to do is to help people discover how artificial intelligence can be an amplifier for them, can be an increase in their agency. And the beauty of this is we actually have a tool for doing that. It's called artificial intelligence. You say, well, how do I learn this new tool in order to do whichever of these tasks better and more creatively as work transforms, as industries transform? And the answer is AI can help you do that. The notion of an agent isn't only an agent that is something that, can help you go act in the world. And I do think that we will see that there will almost like be nothing like an individual contributor anymore. That what we will be seeing is folks who, kind of deploy with a set of co-pilots, a set of agents. They're managing a set of agents, and that will transform the nature of work. You say, "Oh, well, how do I learn how to do that?" Well, there will also be agents that are helping, that are like your coach, your trainer, your, assistant, etc., in helping you do that as well. And I think that's part of how we help enable this transformation in a very human way.
This actually makes me think, do you imagine that in the next 10 years, the LinkedIn could even be a marketplace for really cross-border work? I mean, with that support of agents and so forth, are we really also just increasing the fluidity of someone who may be sitting in a very different background, but is strong in their ability to use tools to just say, "Look, I'm serving you on the other side of the world." A little bit of what happened in the pandemic.
I think for sure, in part also because there's various ways that agents can help build trust. So, for example, if you said like today, say someone reached out and said, "Hey, I'd love to be able to do some kind of writing and branding or social media work for you," and that might be really interesting, and that might be in a country that's 6 time zones away from you or 8 time zones away from you. But you're like, I don't have time to evaluate that. I can't task my folks." Well, you can, like your AI agent may go, "Hey, I'll review this stuff. I'll see if it's a good idea," and then filter that into it. And so enabling trust to happen across it is they actually, in fact, this person demonstrated out of interaction, not just out of credentials, which are hard to flow across various national borders, and credentials are frequently not good enough, but demonstrated that this is a person we should engage in working with, or maybe we should take it to the next level.
Now, we've had a conversation so far about the opportunity for creating employment, and I think there's, really what has occupied the public, though, is all the dangers. And so I want to start with that sort of overall framework of what is that obligation if you're, especially if you're a company as opposed to a government, right? There's a massive amount of public resources in the form of information, public research, even that has led to what feels like the privatization of the gains. And I'm curious, just what is your mental model of if there's a company like some of the big foundational learning models? What is their obligation to be pointing the direction of AI towards like an AI for good of really fundamental changes in humanity?
So I think, um, look, there's going to be a lot of job transformation and a lot of product and service transformation because of AI. Because if you roughly think now, like one of the ways we've been trying to make progress in the world is to have electricity everywhere. So electricity can power, not just HVAC, but machinery and everything else. Now we're going to try to have intelligence everywhere, We're going to bring intelligence to everything, and that will transform a whole bunch of different things, including, of course, not just products and services and companies and markets and industries, but also jobs. And I think what companies, um, you know, they're obviously most focused on how do I provide products and services and jobs within my, kind of both my country and with my region and globally in order to do that. That's part of how I provide to the future of economic opportunity and part of that adaptation of the, um, kind of Adam Smith Wealth of Nations and theory of moral sentiments is, we're providing these things being of service together and it's an efficient mechanism of taking risks and trying things and all the rest. Now, that being said, since companies are also members of society, and when we have these kind of big transformations, part of what you want to be having companies do is not just driving as intensely as they do on cost structure, namely, hey, could we deliver our current product and services with half the people that we currently have, and will that be and then as a good thing ultimately uh, in terms of productivity, which of course is a good thing. By the way, there's not a zero sum amount of work. There then could be 2x the number of firms, kind of competing and so forth, but there's a transition difficulty. And it's that transition difficulty as part of being members of society, which is, hey, how do I um, not just explore the cost equation, but I explore the growth of product and services, the growth of capabilities equation, and being investing in the the human capital of the talent equation to facilitate that in various ways. And I think that's one of the things that companies need to keep in mind as they navigate what is going to be a very broad transformation as we begin to have not just electricity everywhere, but intelligence everywhere.
And arguably that transition when it came to manufacturing, right? This is a journey you've been through. Arguably, some of the politics of today are really defined by that journey. What is the shift in? I appreciate the well. This is what needs to get done, but what's the shift in company structures or governance that would say, well, this will look different. This transition will look different because companies will be more empathetic versus what happened over the last 30 years. I mean, that certainly was not delivered. Companies do not deliver on that. Right?
I don't know what there will be in structures. Part of I think what can be useful to do is obviously everything from kind of soft nudges, like you could imagine a set of different kind of prizes or other kinds of attention and support to, kind of journalist inquiry about which companies are actually in fact doing the best for helping human beings adapt to the new world and creating the new society, to obviously when you get to, governments can even start softly with, hey, you must give us a job impact report and kind of how you're investing in human capital. And even just that attention, even before you get to even more things that could be heavier weight regulation. I think you would need the whole scope. There are many companies that won't think, hey, it's for me to be investing in my community as well as in my own business. But I think that um, the along the spectrum, the nudges of doing that, I think are very good because the more and more companies that we have doing that, the more adaptive our overall society will be.
Do you think we need to be experimenting with different ownership models when it comes to some, especially some of the fundamental models of AI? I mean, and that again, that has been playing out over the last few years.
It We can play with it. Um, there's certain kinds of fundamental things that I always tend to say we should be like there's certain parts of the functioning society where you go, it's more important that it continues to function without fail than it is we innovate on it. Right. So for example, the financial system, rule of law, and kind of trade system, property ownership, a set of those kinds of things. And so you kind of want to be very careful about any substantive modifications of that because when we've tried those kind of modifications, whether it was, various moments in bold history for doing it, it's generally speaking been pretty terrible. Let me choose one that's distal enough that everyone can kind of agree, like the French Revolution. You go, well, that was a real serious problem. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean we shouldn't innovate and doesn't mean we can't try. Like, I think generally speaking, what you want to look at these innovations, say, hey, we have a different ownership model of how the data and property of this kind of AI model works together. It's like, well, we could try it with one. We could see how it works. We could see if the investment works. We could see if people prefer it, if it works. Like making sure one or more gets stood up to try, but to mandate it for all of them is probably you know, maybe a destructive thing, most likely a very value limiting thing.
Right. You're arguing that solutions can often lead to larger problems than the ones they solve in this case. At the same time, there's this weird nexus right now, right, of challenges going on. So we've got sort of climate change, not sort of, we've got a massive issue on climate change, increasing inequality. You're observing widening geopolitical divides, and obviously this massive job realignment due to AI and automation. I think we sometimes forget the automation bit, but um, how do you navigate a pathway where it's the public can see how AI could make each of those things worse? And right now, even that initial start feels like we're on the negative side of the ledger, right? Certainly on climate, we're on the negative side of the ledger. There's a sense that people see the numbers of hundreds of billions of dollars, 200 million being paid to an individual to do this. That also feeds the whole, well, is this just another inequality force, right? So all of these big disruptions, AIs alongside, how do we think about it addressing them rather than what I think is part of the public imagination at the moment that it's exacerbating these disruptive forces?
Well, um, there's a complex set of questions there. One, on the talent side, people go, "Oh my god, they're being paid so much money." And it's like, well, actually, in fact, you know, starting pitchers for some US baseball teams are like $30 million a year, or frankly, I think it goes up to $37 million a year. And you go, which one is generating more value for society? The AI researcher who may be creating a model that gives intelligent guideline to everything that may be happening in human life. Everything from, hey, my kid has this medical issue to, how do I do this kind of work? And so you go, well, actually, in fact, you know, paying talent is a good thing. There's kind of markets for doing that. So that I don't worry about. Now, then they say, well, what about um, kind of the data centers for providing this intelligence? We say, well, once we get this intelligence going, if we're not net ec massively improved on the climate impact for the use of energy, we're clearly not building the intelligences we should and we can. Everything from being much more intelligent washers and HVAC and all the rest, and maybe even, like, how do you run grids more efficiently and what other kinds of things you do. So there's a whole bunch of adding intelligence to that, which I anticipate will be a net positive. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be a lot more electricity used because people are using intelligence for things. And one part of it will be green, and making sure that there's like green energy and efficient use of electricity. But the other thing is, by the way, part of the reason why we use so much energy today and part of what the reason why it causes the climate change that we're looking for is because actually, in fact, the transport and the HVAC and the manufacture of buildings all very important. And so like getting into that and making those things green as well is one of the things intelligence can help with, even as you're using electricity across the whole thing. So
Can I just wanna jump in on this bit here. I think that, there's a lot of potential around the efficiency aspects. At the same time, just energy itself has become the competitive advantage dimension of, this game right now towards this super intelligence. That ultimately, regardless of whatever you make more efficient, would mean that almost the demand for energy is never ending and that there is almost a much higher incentive to get all the oil out of the ground before you go down any further, more expensive technology. I mean, that is an incentives issue, right? I don't think we can innovate our way out of that easily, or at least we run a risk that we're not able to innovate fast enough.
speaking at least within the US envelope, all the hyperscalers are actually, in fact, taking a bunch of the money that they're investing in data centers and also and doing future purchase orders on nuclear energy, fusion and fission. They're doing future purchase orders on geothermal. They're doing future purchase orders, and so they're massively increasing the amount of investment, you know, as customers in these kind of alternative energy schemes, no matter what else is going on, because they themselves want to reflect that the data centers and intelligence they're building, that they're paying attention as kind of as good stewards in society or else to building clean energy. So it isn't, there are other incentives also at play, but there is, of course, you know, well, what is the first race is how do we build as much intelligence as we can by building scalable training centers, which consume a lot of energy in the training even before you get to the inference. And that does happen, and they're doing it that way. But there's a side benefit that isn't just the benefit to the data centers because you go, oh, we've got geothermal really working now. Now we know how to build it not just for data centers, but for cities and for every location that has it. You go, okay, a bunch of folks, including myself, have invested in fusion because if basically you can solve fusion, over time you can solve climate change because the question of carbon sequestration and everything else is just having cheap, clean enough energy in order to be able to do that. And, I'm doing it for philanthropic reasons, but there's a bunch of people who are doing it for AI data center reasons, including Microsoft and others, in order to say, hey, we're trying to invest in these energy sources of the future. And it's awesome if it benefits all of society, not just, our ability to build and deploy our data centers.
Your argument, and I think this is consistent with some of the other things you've said, is that look, even though right now there's almost a capex aspect of this, ultimately when you get to the flow, the innovation will outpace the size of the problem. That's that's a prediction, right? And at some point you also need a governance model that says, wait, is that actually happening? Because at some point you take a call, right? There's some irreversibility about some of the harms that we're doing. Um, what's your sense of how this happens? I mean, there's a lot of rich individuals sort of with a belief system that might, the public might argue, well, comes from the fact that those people have a lot to gain, right?
Yeah. And by the way, well, so one, those people having a lot to gain is part of how we made a whole bunch of progress in society already. So, incentives to the upside is generally speaking a good thing. And, when people say, well, what, that's caused climate change. Yes, it's because there's 8 billion people with a huge number, like a substantial number living in the middle class. That's what causes climate change, right? That comes out from the system. That's a good thing. We wouldn't want to go, oh, we're going to arbitrarily, draw a lottery and move down to 4 billion people. That would be an inhumane thing. So
Plot of a famous Hollywood film, yes.
yes, exactly. We all look at the positive mechanisms that got it and then adjust those for how do we then adjust for these climate change issues. Now, part of the thing that I think people on a regulatory front too often go to, whether they're the regulators or government people or journalists or commentators or critics, is immediately go to, well, put me in charge and I will tell the companies what to do or not do. And that's like bad network design mechanism, bad, it's one of the reasons like socialism doesn't work. But what you can do is say, well, look, we have the following concerns. So we're gonna mandate that the companies publish the following kinds of reports, or at least do the following kinds of reports that they report to the government. And by the way, how can we trust those reports? Well, it's pretty straightforward. We have this notion of auditing. Like all of the big companies are all audited. And so if you said, okay, your auditors, who are a third party organization, must validate to either the government or the public, depending on what the thing is, that the following kind of thing is happening within, climate and energy, that the notion of how green energy is being developed, what the intersection curves look like, and so forth, then that actually, in fact, begins to move you substantially in the right direction just because you're measuring it. And then, by the way, you say you're looking at the measurements and the predictions, which are validated by the auditors, and you go, this is a problem. Then you take that problem to the next level.
Yeah, and I think that it's on us. It's certainly not only on the creators that we try and get those systems in place at the pace at which people are trying to innovate. And I think that that often is out of pace. Let me ask you though, you must get these kind of questions all the time. So where is there, do you think, as part of this question of the dangers of AI, where do you see, look, this is overhyped? And where do you sometimes go, gee, I wish people would focus on this danger because that's a real danger?
Well, generally speaking, I think the real dangers are the most substantive dangers are twofold. So one is um, AI in the hands of bad humans, right? So cybercrime, other kinds of things. And so, and that gets occluded by like the Terminator movie or, like this kind of stuff. It's like, no, no, no. Think about what it means. And this is one of the things you have to be, concerned about. Like, okay, if we're putting superpowers in everyone's hands, including like cyber criminals who could, try to take over the grid of a country and hold it hostage and other kinds of things. That could be a real problem. Bioterrorism. There's a stack of things there. That's number one. Then number two is, and while like in super agency is like, look, here's all the very valuable things we can get to, by calling it the cognitive industrial revolution, I'm not just talking about the upsides, I'm also talking about the transitions. And in the transition, that will be difficult because, uh, you know, basically almost every white collar job will change. Some of them will go away. Some of them will look very, very different. And that transition of a society in terms of how work goes, we did go through it in the Industrial Revolution. It was very painful in terms of the cost to society. I think it'll still be challenging here. I don't think there's any way to not go through it, that it isn't painful, but maybe we could do it better. And of course, we have this tool, AI, to help us with that. But those are the two things that I think are the real substantive risks that are really worth focusing on.
What's a risk that's overhyped?
Well, I think a classic one that I think is overhyped is that, so-called existential risk that we're going to make robots that are going to look at us as ants and, that are kind of pesky underfoot. I think that's one that's overhyped. I think also there's a lot of weird corners. Like, for example, like, oh, the really important thing is woke AI. That's overhyped. Or the fact that American context here, or the fact that like there's places where the profusion of content from AI will necessarily get to a higher misinformation framework. It could, but I think it's overhyped because I think there's lots of ways that AI could be used for much better truth-seeking information. I mean, to give you a micro example, one of the pieces of academic work last year was that you take people who believe in conspiracy theories, like the moon landing never happened, and AIs can, in 25% of the circumstances, talk people out of that conspiracy theory, and it persists for at least 6 months. And the reason is they can do it is because they don't start saying, "You fool." They can start going, "Well, what made you think that? And what happens when you read this?" Or, "If you were to consider this as an alternative, what makes you disbelieve this?" in a very patient way. And that is actually yes. And therefore, that can help with truth seeking across the audience. So, like, the way you shape it can be much better, and that's part of the overhyping is not saying there is a 0% issue here. It's that the fact that there's a bunch of different ways we can solve it, so that's actually much more positive than negative.
Yeah, and I think in all of these discussions, I personally, I also see all of that opportunity. What I actually wonder about is where do incentives sit at a higher level, right? Are there more incentives for these individuals to say, look, I can grab this technology and I can maybe get $10 out of this person by feeding them the wrong thing versus I get $1 out of this person by putting a barrier against this wrong thing, right? Or so supporting them. And I think there's a little bit of a human behavioral question that the course of the last 1,000 years, whatever we can see that we get it wrong sometimes, right? And it has lasting impacts.
But the mistake usually is that you can figure out everything in advance. It's a little bit like if you were trying to plan driving from San Francisco to LA and say, "I'm not gonna get in the car until I figured out every possible pothole, weather condition, etcetera." You're never gonna drive, right? You have to kinda get in the car and go, and that's the thing that you learn and iterate as you're going. And so that's part of the reason I go back to, like, metrics, right? Like, well, what's the things we should be measuring such that we're worried about this? Like, we say, "Look, technology can get it wrong in some ways. What are things we can measure early?" So if we notice that that actually is increasing in some way that is danger enough to really kind of push it, then we've got the early warning system through measuring, and frequently measuring then creates the innovation loop within companies to say, "Well, okay, how do we fix that?" And so, for example, if you I mean, like, on a very basic thing, said if you said, "Look, we know that there's a set of things that we think of as conspiracy theories." My pet one is a lot of the anti-vax stuff. And you say, "Well, look, if in your social network a whole bunch of anti-vax belief is going up because you're measuring it, then clearly there's something wrong about how information is flowing within your social network. What are the things that you should, as an innovative company, do to try to help people understand what the truths around vaccines are, which is not, of course, that everything is there, you can't question, et cetera, but the fact that, you know, vaccinated populations save, millions of lives and millions of children, even if in some individual cases, there are sometimes side effects that are undesirable.
I mean, maybe going to masters of scale, right? Because we are in a way talking about what scales faster, right? Do we outdo the bad and so forth? And you talked about metrics, and I'm just curious. I mean, I wonder if we can bring in like a Rawlsian type of approach here. Like, what does AI do to that last person, right? In what ways do you believe that AI can serve as like a scaling force for empathy, equity, and empowerment, like those kind of metrics, especially communities that are historically excluded? Is there an opportunity here to bridge certain divides? Or
I think there's definitely some real ways to be helpful. One, like on empathy, like what my startup Inflection AI kind of started really importantly in the field with basically saying, um, training EQ is important as IQ, and we tend to model off how we interact with things. So, like having these agents be empathetic and everything else is a broad based empathy. Another thing is in terms of inclusion, which is wealthy people have always been able to afford tutors for their children, et cetera. And now you can have a tutor in every pocket. And what's more, when you begin to think about like healthcare outcomes, which lead to potential, one of the things that I think we are a small number of years away from is a medical assistant that's on every smartphone that's running. That again, wealthy people have concierge doctors, have privileged channels to hospitals, et cetera. And actually having something there for everyone is part of what creates that unlock of human potential. And I think that that's part of, I think, the reasons why I think that this will raise all of the boats a lot. That doesn't mean that there won't still be massive and substantive inequality. Like the classic mistake is, well, I think that a CEO should not be paid more than 5 times what the bottom person is paid. Well, I think 10, I think 100. Well, what's the thing that makes all this work right is a market, a network, of functioning and that generates value. That's part of what we've learned about the modern world. So as opposed to rumblings of my own intuitive stomach of me as the socialist in command, it's you use networks in order to do that.
Yeah, and I do think that what's clear is when you have metrics and you have incentives around those metrics, these are things that, should be lauded. These are sources of efficiency. I do think you can get the metrics wrong. And I would say the two examples you used are particularly meaningful to us. Actually, there are two things we're working on right now, which is how do you get AI tutors on the education side? How do you get community health workers to actually leapfrog doctors by getting the right assistant? And it's a massive opportunity. But I will say to you, Reid, we're swimming against the tide of the current incentives. We're trying to get some of the best brains to work on that problem first because it truly has way more social impact. Then can I incrementally improve the best hospital in the world? And so we have to navigate that, but I end up using people whose fundamental metrics are different. They're not optimizing for the cash in their bank.
Just the general use of making these smart models available at low inference cost is something that can be deployed and helped in all of that way. And so that anyway, that's one of the things that I would say that some of these incentives are in fact delivering components of your agenda, even if, you know, uh, other things need to be, kind of nudged and pushed in.
Smartphones themselves are a great example of that, right? We benefit from that huge scale. As someone sitting in the US and has been part of that, AI revolution that has come through and is one of the first investors in OpenAI, how have you been observing the China ecosystem, and how do you think about nations coming together, especially as you've spoken a bit about the need for some cross governance, especially around bad actors and so forth?
So I've been a student of kind of the amazing talent, speed, generativity of the Chinese ecosystem for a number of years. Ever since we launched, LinkedIn in China and before, and so I think that there is a great set of very good things that are happening in China, and it isn't just the local champions of DeepSeek and Quen and Kimi and other things, but also the fact that there is intense, not just technological development, but one of the things I think we and the rest of the world can learn is also adoption. And how do you adopt these things in ways that help transform your industries in very good ways. And so, I tend to be part of the reason why we're speaking here. I tend to be a great believer in bridge building and collaboration. I think it's one of the things that has helped build many of the amazing positive things about the modern world. And people say, "Well, but I have all these challenges right now." It's like, well, you know, to take a simple argument, you could live in any, like, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, you'd always choose now, right? Because of the progress we make. Doesn't mean there's a ton more progress to make, but I think that's part of having, like, one of the reasons why it's important to have trade, dialogue, collaboration, even as we have competition, even as we have these other things. And it's part of the reason why events like this are important.
And I wonder, as part of that, bringing it to this AI for good conversation, if we look at big collaboration between countries, things that have built bridges, often it has been big social challenges, right? Let's build the International Space Station. Do you think we can bring different ecosystems together on some grand challenges, the final opportunity for AI to deliver real fundamental population scale benefits? And could you imagine what that kind of challenge might be?
I think I am rationally optimistic. So I'd say, yes, I'm optimistic, and it's not irrationally so, despite all the current difficulties. I do think that, obviously, right now, for various things, including the U.S. government, we're living in a place where there's increased distrust and a decrease in global cooperation for this. But but that doesn't, even when you have those, I think that where you have good people trying, ultimately you can get to the optimist outcomes. And part of, like, one of the reasons I wrote this book, Super Agency, this year, is that we get to the right outcomes with AI by steering towards things that we think are very good, not trying to steer away from things that are suboptimal.
It's an amazing, I think, place to land us, and I think a very optimistic vision, but one which is very much at the same time thinking about how do you navigate this properly. Reed, thanks so much. I know we've used up 40 minutes. I mean, I can continue asking you questions.
No, what's great, Gaurav. Thank you, and look forward to the next.